As we take a look at what's going on in the statewide news, we get to visit with our good friend Scott Braddock, editor of quorumreport.com. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Doing well, and my Astros are doing well so far, although, as you mentioned, maybe there won't be any football, and they've already got some problems. Florida Marlins, reporting that they had some cases of COVID-19 and people asking whether or not they took the right precautions and all that, even though there's nobody in the stands, cardboard cutouts, all of that. Could anything else go wrong in the year 2020?
Scott, I think this is an excellent idea for the Marlins, okay? It could be the next stimulus because, again, as players, have to leave, they just select a random person who needs the weekly paycheck to go in.
Put them in there.
Play some. It's the Marlins. They're bad.
Put me in, coach.
Yeah.
I'm ready to play.
I mean, it can't get much worse for the Marlins anyway. It's just next person who needs a stimulus check.
Yeah, have at it.
Why not?
For the 1,200, you could add another zero.
Yeah, exactly. Hey,
right.
there's a lot actually to get into, and it started last week. The new chairman of the Texas state chairman of the Republican Party, Alan West, last week, Scott, I believe had challenged the chairman of the Texas Democrat Party to a debate. That made a little bit of news, and then over the weekend, West doing a little clashing with the governor already. So the Chairman West making some headlines already.
Coming right out of the gate in controversial fashion, which is kind of what we expected with Alan West, the former one-term congressman from Florida, originally from Georgia, was in Florida after his military service. He was one of the Tea Party rebels back in 2010. That's when he was elected, and then he was defeated after his district, by the way, was altered in redistricting by Republicans, which is kind of interesting. He refused to back down from what he called his conservative principles and ended up losing the race, even though he had, I think, more than $15 million in the bank. So I just want to set the stage for folks. Alan West's history, and we'll see if this holds up here in Texas, when there was a changing political environment in Florida, he did not adapt to the situation politically, and he lost his race. Now we have things changing in Texas, and he's the new chairman of the Republican Party. That's just for context. He came out of the gate and said he wanted to do some Lincoln Douglas-style debates with the chairman of the Texas Democratic Party, longtime chairman, Gilberto Hinojosa, who didn't show any interest in that, although you did have some Democrats saying, Chad, at least privately to me, and maybe some others said it publicly, it would have kind of been maybe a gift for the Democrats to have, somebody who's, saying a bunch of sort of quote-unquote right-wing things as the head of the Republican Party right before the general election, not when you typically want to do that. Just one point of contact here. Michael McCall, I live in his district, the congressman from Austin, and robocalls going into the district today. Chad, those robocalls, they tell voters that Michael McCall is one of the most effective members of Congress and, quote, one of the most bipartisan. So that's what Republican, candidates are stressing right now in various districts all across the state. The question of whether the chairman should be debating the other chairman of the other party. I mean, it could be an interesting show, but I'm not sure that
never happens.
Not really sure it helps to elect Republicans. I mean, look, when the race for chairman was going on, and I attended some of the events back when we were allowed to attend events, Chad. Some of the events where West and the now former chairman, James Dickey, would debate, Dickey would stress the mechanics of running the party as far as fundraising, field operations, etc. And West would talk more about having a message that resonates with people. In fact, at one event he had said, this is pretty close to the quote, I don't have it in front of me, but he said, it doesn't matter how much money you raise if you have a crappy message. So he's more focused on messaging, and we've already seen him, putting out some videos on social media, highlighting the fact that he thinks Austin is too liberal, breaking news. And then over the weekend, you had Chairman West. He was on the political show they do on NBC5 in Dallas-Fort Worth, where he took issue directly with Governor Abbott. Now, I had already heard West, and you had too, say things along the lines of he didn't like all these executive orders, and he had talked about this current environment being a lot like what the Texas rebels, who were fighting the Mexican army back in the 1800s. He said that we're basically on similar battlefields right now. He said that what we see right now is tyranny in the state of Texas. Gromer Jeffers at the Dallas Morning News had asked West on NBC5 about the governor's executive orders and about his pandemic response. And the quote from Chairman West, again, the Republican chairman talking about the Republican governor, said, quote, "We are supposed to be governed by our elected officials, not ruled by our elected officials." He did acknowledge that, of course, the governor needs to be able to act quickly when there's a crisis. That's why you have an executive. It's one of the reasons you have an executive, so they can move quick without having to check with the legislature. But West said something that I think some Democrats would agree with too. You saw where Republican Senator Charles Perry had said a version of this earlier on. At least a few weeks ago, had said that the governor's executive orders need to be, they need to be checked by the legislature. They need some legislative oversight. And he said, he's not a fan of these executive orders. And what the direct quote from West on the legislature was, he said, quote, "You got to come back to the legislature if you want to continue to send out orders or what have you. It has to be done by legislative process." As we have talked about here on the show, Chad, neither one of you or I, we don't expect the governor to do that. Of course, the governor's the only one at this point when the legislature's not in session. He could call them into session, but if you follow the logic on that, he would be calling them into session to provide oversight of himself. I don't think that's about to happen.
Yeah, I don't see that happening either. And listen, I think that's a fine debate to have. Whether or not,
Sure.
and I think there are probably some Democrats out there who would say, well, hey, why not? Because you look at the governor, and you've got some polling data there. I'm sure, Scott, that you've got Republicans who are mad at the governor. You've got Democrats who are mad at the governor. You've got conservatives who are mad at the governor. You've got liberals who are mad at it. I don't know who's happy with Governor Abbott right now.
It is hard to discern that. And one of the things that we saw in that Quinnipiac poll from just last week, Chad, very interesting, and I think maybe the most interesting piece of data in the poll, when you look at the trends, the Quinnipiac pollsters had said that a month ago, it was somewhere around 30% of Texans, were telling the pollsters that they knew somebody who has the coronavirus, somebody who had been diagnosed with it. And just a month later, when they released the poll last Wednesday, more than 60% of Texans knew somebody who had been diagnosed with coronavirus. And so this is something that's becoming not just something people are seeing on TV and not just something they're hearing about on the radio or seeing online. It's something that they're actually seeing in their own families and in their own communities. And as the number of people who have some real-world experience with coronavirus, as that number goes up, the numbers for the governor go down. And so he had seen, over that same month period, a 20-point negative swing for his approval ratings for Governor Abbott. He's under 50 for both his coronavirus response and in his overall job approval, which, Chad, Governor Abbott is somebody who, in better times, is somebody who's liked by Republicans and Democrats alike. I mean, he's somebody who would generally enjoy approval ratings closer to 70%, 66, 69% in some of the polls that we had seen in recent years. But now he's at 47% for his coronavirus response, 48% disapprove of his response to it, and he's now at 48-44 overall approval, which is down from 56-32. I mean, just 1 month ago, 32% was, the number of people who were against him, but there have been a lot of controversial decisions in the meantime, and I'm sure you've seen online. He's been on Twitter and elsewhere doing television interviews and that sort of stuff. Abbott has been defending his mask order, which it's interesting that he's having to defend it, Chad, because in that same poll, and I've seen some other polling that suggests this is true as well, the mask order actually enjoys 80% approval. Only 19% in this last poll said they disapproved of the mask order.
Yeah.
But, of course, the governor's worried about the base of the Republican Party, which is what you're seeing from Chairman West. The new chairman certainly reflecting the base of the party, and I think the question here is going to be whether, once again, party purification, which seems to be what West is interested in, whether party purification or expansion of the party's appeal, which is going to work, which of those is going to be effective in a year in which we expect Democrats to be pretty competitive in this state.
Well, and you mentioned the mask deal and the mask polling. That pretty much mirrors some of the polling I've seen nationwide, where nearly 79, 80% of people nationwide approve of mask wearing. Yet for the governor, and this is what I also thought was very interesting and bad for Abbott, to be quite honest with you, his disapproval rating, Scott, is higher than I've ever seen it.
Yes. This is a bad time to be Governor Abbott politically. And look, let's be real here. It's very difficult for him to govern in this situation. As we have said here many times, there's no blueprint or owner's manual for how you're supposed to respond when you're the governor of a big state to a pandemic. He's having to figure out a lot of this on the fly, and the people who are angry with him, of course, are their Monday morning quarterbacking, and here's what I would do instead, and that sort of thing. But one of the realities in politics is when you get elected, guess what? You're responsible. And the governor in this instance also took more responsibility on himself because, as you remember, and as we've talked about many times here, when he laid out his plan for how the state was going to reopen and lift restrictions on business and on economic activity and on the movement of people, they could finally get out of their homes and go back to restaurants and go back to their favorite retail store and all of that. The governor said he was taking away the authority of local officials to make these decisions. And so that means he does have the power, but he also has the responsibility. If things go great, well, he's golden, and if things go badly, he's not.
Scott, do you think part of the reason, and again, perception plays a lot into how people look at how the governor is doing? You look at Andrew Cuomo, and for a while, Andrew Cuomo up in New York was enjoying some pretty high approval ratings. Then he started being questioned by that state's press about sending coronavirus patients into nursing homes and everything else. New York's numbers, they blow away everybody else's numbers as far as deaths and everything else in New York. For the governor here in Texas, Abbott, he's been going on doing a lot of local TV and talking to anchors who, and I'm going to put this in a polite way, television anchors like to be nice. They don't try to be controversial, and they have a limited window as to how long they can spend with the governor, usually about 5 minutes. So they can't.
I think that's generally right.
Yeah, they can't drill down and do a lot of follow-ups. Mm-hmm. If the governor was doing more press conferences and talking to the media and talking to Texans, do you think his numbers would look any different than as they look right now?
I'm not sure, but it's an interesting point, and a friend of mine who works at the Houston Chronicle, Rob Eckhart, is the Austin bureau chief for Hearst newspapers for both the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News, and he was on a podcast a couple of days ago in which he made a point that I hadn't really thought about, which is, and as you say, the governor's just not engaging with the press in the same way that these other governors have, and even Ron DeSantis. Mr. Eckhart was talking about DeSantis. If you just Google Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, and press conferences, lots of them come up. He's been talking to the press. It's sort of unique that Governor Abbott is not. And Eckhart made the point. He said, if he was interacting with the press and taking the tough questions, and a lot of them are not trick questions or anything, it's just the straightforward questions that someone who's in charge of a major state ought to be asked. If he was taking those questions, Chad, he and his administration might also be able to foresee some of the potholes that are coming up, because one of the things that we do in the press, and I'll brag on our profession for just a little bit. We don't get a lot of chances to do that. One of the things is we kind of game things out and try to figure out, okay, where may this policy be headed, and what would the consequences be? And so Eckhart was making the point that if he was looking ahead and answering questions and really interacting and having that give and take with those of us who are paid to think these things through and try to cover them as well as we can, the government might not be making so many of these missteps and might be better in tune with what's happening in different communities. Because the other thing that happens when you have a robust press corps that's interacting with a governor is that each one of those members of the press is also representing their communities. So the people from Dallas, the reporters from Dallas, they ask questions relevant to that. The reporters from Houston, same thing, and those of us in Austin would do the same thing.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Doesn't look like it.
No, he doesn't. No. Well, and he never was, a governor who was open to a lot of press access in the first place. And I will say it's been unfortunate to see this. When the governor first put restrictions in place for all Texans, it was told to us in the press that we weren't going to be given as much access to the governor because of social distancing requirements. All of that made some sense at first, but then it seemed pretty convenient that as restrictions were lifted after the governor laid out his plan back on April 27th, that those restrictions on the press have not been lifted. Those are still basically in place.
Yeah. Scott, tell folks that they can find what are you working on over at quorumreport.com.
Well, we are going through all of the realities of the campaign season, Chad. It never stops. It's amazing, isn't it, that it used to be, think about this, it used to be that these campaigns would not even really get going until after Labor Day, once the primaries and the runoffs were over. But like I said, robocalls are already going into various districts, and block walking is happening all across the state, and the campaign just never, ever stops. And in fact, in Austin, there's one Texas House candidate who lost the runoff by 9 points and is still taking the deal to court. She says maybe the election was stolen. Really doubt it, but there's always something interesting going on. We've got it all for you. At quorumreport.com, you can sign up for a subscription there. Just click the banner that says subscriptions. It's real convenient there at quorumreport.com.
All right, very good. Scott, as always, appreciate your time.
Thanks, my friend. Talk soon.
That's Scott Braddock, editor, quorumreport.com.